Horror is one of my favorite genres in general, and Friday the 13th is one of my favorite horror franchises. In fact, I think Jason is the coolest design and my favorite horror icon. He's scary, yet he can be a bit goofy at times, but just his general look and appearance always stood out to me. As much as I love Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger, something about Jason, the hockey mask and the machete wielding monster that he has all wrapped up in one, just made me hooked every time I watched him on screen. But what about the comics? There's a few comic appearances and even a couple of one-shot or two-parter comics out there, but today I want to basically focus on the only long-running series, or the only one that had more than 5 issues for a story arc, and that came out in 2006. My main reason for this is because it's October, and we're close to Halloween, and I love Jason as a horror icon, and I want to give you my opinion on this comic and if it's worth reading. So the story starts off in typical horror trope style, with a group of teenagers going into the woods to hook up, smoke, and be adventurous. But, of course, we know that Jason does not like that bullshit. And like usual, Jason's ready to kill all of them. The story starts interesting enough. It's actually told in the point of view of a survivor of the attack by Jason, as she recalls the events that led to her being badly hurt and being questioned by the police. Through these events, you kind of get a backstory of this universe with Jason. Things like stories told that he's dead and drowned, so there's a copycat killer every few years that follows in Jason's steps. It kind of pulls from some of the movies, but if I were to take a guess, it's mostly covering like maybe movies 1 to 4, and it kind of ends there where Jason dies, and then maybe 5, but more in the general sense that 5 is kind of like this redone almost with the copycat idea, so kind of had that 5 in there. And I don't believe 6 happened at 6 onward, because I don't think this is like the zombified Jason that we get later, even though he comes from the water. But you know what I mean, he's not super zombied yet. Anyway, the story itself is as thin as one sheet of paper. Teenagers being idiots, making a lot of noise. Jason eventually has enough and finally strikes out, murdering someone right on the docks of the campsite these people are staying at. And I will say that I actually like the fact that Jason kills pretty brutal here, using, the machete to the face, eye, stomach, or chopping off bits and pieces, and taking the victims into the water or hiding the bodies. That to me is a really cool idea. I always enjoy a smarter killer version of Jason versus just, walking really slow and waiting till somebody falls into his lap and he kills them. But sadly, that's all there is to this book. You keep going back and forth between the timelines and our lead heroine trying to recount the story and warning people that he's coming, and then we flip to everyone dying. I don't think the story structure is all that bad. Having an idea of having some type of like recounting who lives and who dies can be interesting, especially if you go attached to a character through a flashback and you fear their death or what happened to them. Instead, everybody is really, and I can't stress this enough, really fucking annoying and pieces of shit here. So instead of fearing the impending doom for all these characters, I'm more like begging for it. And see, that's the biggest flaw to this comic, the characters. See, Friday the 13th is far from a perfect franchise. In fact, one might argue there's more cons than pros to this franchise, and I couldn't really have an argument against that. Saying that, the ones that work, such as 2, 4, 6, and even to a lesser extent 3 and 1, had a group of characters that ranged from decent to great. Yes, they always had one bad character, but, the good characters outshine them usually. Especially 4 and 6 had a stellar cast for me, and having characters to root for while being chased by a slasher is key, because you want to like these characters as much as you like the mass murderer that these movies are based on. But if you don't have that, that's what happens when you just have a bunch of characters who are annoying or assholes that you just don't give a shit what happens to them, and that's what this comic does. So everyone's an asshole, and you don't really care if they're going to die, and that's a big no-no, because you're just slowly waiting for them to get picked off instead of rallying behind some of them. Saying that, this is a comic, and the good part is you can read through it really fast, but if you ask me who and what characters are in this series, I couldn't name one single character besides Jason. I will say it was cool to have a main character who had survival instincts, and she had some really cool ideas of how to trick Jason and survive, but honestly, she's a very far cry from like Ginny or anything like that. She wasn't horrible, but I hated her fate in this, and really she kind of just felt like a throwaway lead character. And that really kind of just sums up my opinion on the entire 6-issue comic. There's just a lot to be desired. You get the staple of Friday the 13th, the killer, a bunch of teenagers, titties flying everywhere, but none of it stands or lands. You know what I'm saying? Stands or lands. I like that one. I'm going to have to copyright that. But instead, they give you a comic that can rival maybe part 7 or maybe part 8. I don't know, but it's definitely not rivaling part 4 or 6, and that really sucks. Well, I don't think it's super bad. I do think that it lacks any decent characters, and besides some vicious kills, nothing really stands out in this comic. So is it worth reading? I'd say not really. You don't have to read it. You won't miss much if you don't read it. Even as a major Friday the 13th fan such as myself, I'm hoping one day that we'll get a Friday the 13th comic worth reading, but this isn't it. If you find it super cheap or free, maybe. Other than that, you could probably pass on this one, because if you don't like a character in this besides Jason, it's really hard to enjoy this one besides some vicious kills, which you can probably see most of them through this video. Anyway, that's my video on Friday the 13th comic. Again, very disappointing, but that's kind of what I expected when I jumped into it. But what about you guys? Did you enjoy this comic? Did you read this comic? Do you want Friday the 13th comics? Because, you know, some people are like, well, that franchise sucks, so no. And to that I say, you're mean. I love Friday the 13th. I hope you guys have a very good Halloween. It's been a fun month, and I got a couple of more videos coming, hopefully. But I hope you enjoyed this one, and everybody else, have a good day.